people were walking with their phones, and then other people were just minding their business trying to walk along. And yeah, and I had a little emphasis because nobody knew what was really going on. I had a little emphasis so they could bump into them. But my theme or topic or what I was given is distraction can lead to destruction. So if you saw how those everybody was walking towards each other, they could have just been really they should have been passing each other down the street. But because one of them was distracted, they didn't even know that they bumped into the other person. Now I have several scriptures and they're not really long, so I'm just going to throw them out to you, and I'll give the examples so you'll have time to get to them. My first one, Genesis 19:26. Genesis 19:26. So we're going to get Genesis 19 and 26. If you have your phones, you guys can go on BibleGateway.com and then in the subject bar, put in the book Genesis, chapter 19. I think that's that semicolon. Semicolon. Colon. Thank you. I get them mixed up sometimes. Colon 6 and hit search. Genesis chapter 19, verse 6. There's going to be a few. So, Lot's wife. And if anybody knows the story, we're actually talking about Lot today. That was, but not her. We didn't get to that part yet. But if you know the story of Lot and his wife and how the angels, God was so disgusted with Sodom and Gomorrah. And remember today, class, for those of you who were in Sunday school, God thought of Sodom. Well, when Lot chose Sodom to go to, it was already an evil place. It wasn't a good place. It didn't have a good reputation. So by this time, I guess some years or some time has passed. God is totally disgusted with Sodom and Gomorrah. And, he's like, I'm done with this. I'm paraphrasing, as Christians do. So he sent the angels because Abraham had actually pleaded on Lot's behalf, on his nephew's behalf. And he kind of pleaded God down, which is he bargained with God. He was brave, but I mean, hey, that was his heavenly father. And he asked God, he needed God to save Lot. So the angels came to warn Lot and his family to gather your stuff and let's get out of this city because God is going to destroy the city. And so as the story goes on, they were leaving the city. Originally, it was Lot, his wife, and his two daughters. The angels gave them instruction and said, when you leave, do not look back. God is going to destroy this. Do not look back. He gave them specific instructions. And if you know anything about angels, yes, they come from heaven. They get instructions from God. So if an angel is giving you instruction, an angel of light from the Lord, okay, not the dark demons. But if an angel is giving you instruction, you are to take it as if it is from God because that's what God gave him. So the angel said, do not look back. So they were riding along. And what happened? Lot's wife looked back. She looked back to see what happened to her life, what was happening to those people. I can only imagine. She was distracted so much that she lost her life, turned into a pillar of salt. She was distracted by the things that were behind her. And the thing is, distraction can lead to destruction. So that's a way to say, to remind us, don't be distracted by the things in your past. Allow God to do something new. Don't be in bondage by the things in your past. You cannot change them. God can not only make something new, but he can actually use some of those things, but you leave it up to him. We can't stay there. We have to move on. Because if we stay in the past, we'll never give ourselves room enough to actually go and see, as they say, what the end's going to be, the next step for the future. God doesn't always give every single little step. He doesn't give you the entire map all the time. Sometimes he'll just give you what the result may be. But we have to trust him to take those steps in between. Lot's wife didn't trust for the steps in between. So that's one distraction. Second one is an example. Matthew 25, chapter 25, verses 10 to 12. Matthew 25, verses 10 to 12. And this is the story. We read about this story. It's the story about the 5 wise and the 5 foolish virgins. Or pretty much just girls, because they use virgins for everything but young girls. But we have 5 who were wise who already had oil in their lamps. They were good. We have 5 who were foolish. The 5 who were foolish, I would say, they were procrastinators. And God help me, I need help. I don't know about anybody else, but I have some areas that I just need to, God, I'm just like, I don't feel like it right now, I'll do it later, but knowing good and well, I'm probably not going to feel like it later either. But these ladies were, to me, it seemed like they were procrastinators. They didn't have what they needed to be prepared to go with the bridegroom into the wedding. They didn't have any oil. They decided to come unprepared. And that eventually led them to be shut out of the wedding, to be pretty much left out of the blessing because they were unprepared. I don't know what their distraction was, but their focus wasn't where it should be. So my point here is to find your focus, keep your focus. Because distractions can lead to destruction. Whatever they were distracted by led them to have no oil in their lamp. So by the time the bridegroom came, they were just left out there in the cold, just flailing along. And then what hope did they have? Next example, Jacob. Genesis 19:21 through 25. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's not 19:21 through 25. It may be a different one. It is a different one. I typed the wrong one. But anyway, the story of Jacob. If anybody knows anything about Jacob, Jacob was messy. But his father was messy too, and so was his grandfather, to be exact, because they all lied. But that's a story for another time. But Jacob wanted Rachel. He worked with his uncle for Rachel. He wanted Rachel so bad. He was so in love with her. I will work 7 years for my wife. And if anybody knows the things about marriage in those days, the man would take a lady or his wife into a tent, whether it be his mother's tent or whomever tent, and then they would consummate the marriage. Y'all look it up later. I ain't got time to explain. Relational. So Jacob was so eager. He was so happy. He was distracted so much. And I'm going to say Jacob was distracted by lust because he had waited for this woman for 7 years. So distracted. I don't know if anybody ever looked at it this way. He was so distracted by his want for Rachel that he didn't even, and I know it was dark, but they had lamps. Somebody could have lit a torch, that he didn't notice until the very next morning that the woman he had slept with was not the one that he wanted. It was her sister. Yes, icky, I know, but back in the day they did that stuff. He was so distracted that what he thought he really desired wasn't what he ended up with. So when you're going after these things, whatever it is in life, whatever it is your goal is, make sure that you know what's genuine. Make sure that you know the situations that are good for you. How do you know? Oh, well, I'm glad you asked. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not into your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. How will you know what is good? What isn't? Well, this is where you ask the Father for wisdom, for discernment. So the things that you come upon, so the work that you're doing, so what you're working towards, so the steps that you take are the right steps. They're the correct steps, and they won't lead you into destruction, or as some say, folly, but they won't lead you down the wrong path. Okay. Another example is, and this one doesn't have, I didn't have a, oh yes, I did. Back. Oh no, it wasn't. So I'm just going to give a couple more examples really quickly. King David was so distracted by Bathsheba's beauty, by his desire for her. You can say lust, but by his desire for her, that he ended up killing an innocent man because of a series of events. He desired another man's wife. He took another man's wife to bed, which she didn't have any power. She had to obey the king. He got her pregnant, and to cover it up, he had her husband put on the front line to be killed in the war. Because her husband was noble, he said, I will not go, because David called him back so he could cover it up, so he could have relations with his wife, be like, okay, she's pregnant. Oh, it's mine. Yay, they didn't have DNA tests back then. So to make it seem like that it was Uriah, that she was husband's baby. Well, he wouldn't go into his house because he felt like, why should I be here enjoying myself and enjoying my wife when my fellow soldiers are on the battlefield fighting? So David was like, you know what? He's not doing what I want him to do. So David put him on the front line to be killed, because otherwise, eventually the baby's going to be born and Bathsheba's going to be discovered. So David put him in the midst of the battle, and he ended up dying. Meanwhile, God sees all this. God exposes David through the prophet. And when the prophet exposes him, he lets David know the baby that's about to be born, he's not going to live. And the baby that was born did not live, because people talk about Solomon and stuff, but Solomon's older brother did not live because of the sin that David committed, because he was distracted by lust, by desire, by his want for this woman. He allowed it to influence his decision. He didn't have to do it. As bad as we feel these urges and things, we always have a choice. So remember that. Don't allow your hunger or your desire for things to influence you to make a bad decision, or to make a decision that you're going to regret down the road. So remember that when you're making decisions. I'll say that to not just the younger people, but to everybody. One thing I like to tell the kids is that every decision or every choice either has a reward or a consequence, basically a result. So if your choice is not going to result in your desired result, a reward, do you really want to make it? And that's in life. We have to think about, we can't just sometimes we make decisions, but if we have wisdom, we can go through there. But, however, is the choice you're making a smart one? And it doesn't just apply to kids, because sometimes as adults, we make choices that we know are wrong, but because we have to have things, or because we want them so bad, we end up with a bad result, and then we regret it later. And then you feel away. But that's not God's fault. That's on us. One of the biggest things God gives us is free will. That's why he'll never force himself upon us. The Holy Ghost will never force himself upon us. It's for us to accept Jesus, God's plan of salvation. Just a reminder. Another example, I'm almost done here. Esau, Jacob's brother, his twin. His carelessness caused him to lose his birthright as the oldest son. His birthright included it included all the wealth that his father had, all the authority that his father had. But because he was so hungry, he was like, Jacob was like, he went to his brother Jacob, his twin brother. Jacob had made the stew. Esau came back, and Esau was like, give me some of that stew. And he was like, and Jacob was like, well, And like I said, you remember, Jacob is messy. Well, if you give me your birthright, I'll give you some of this too. Esau says, well, what good is it to me? I'm hungry. I'm dying here. Think about it. Something that's going to affect you and your descendants, or you for the rest of your life and your children. Is it worth giving that up for just to eat a pot of stew because you're hungry? You can't wait a little bit? But he gave it up. He was careless. He didn't take it seriously. I don't know what his mindset was, but he was distracted by his hunger. And because of that, he allowed that to actually make that influence on him. Oh, you can have the birthright. It's no good to me right now. Not realizing or not just envisioning this is going to be some good to me later. And then when it all came down to it, when Isaac ended up blessing Jacob at the end, even though Jacob was, like I said, he was messy. His mom was messy too. That's why y'all shouldn't have favorites as kids. I understand everybody's different, but Isaac had his favorite. Rebecca had her favorite. She influenced her son to lie and get his brother's blessing because their father was about to die. It was all messy, just messy, messy, messy. But Esau, with the stew, he had a choice. He allowed his distraction to cause him to miss out on his birthright as the oldest son. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, they allowed their jealousy about the attention that Jesus was getting that was being taken from them to blind them to who he really was. They allowed the power and the adoration of being of their positions that they had because they would get the finest seats in the synagogue, aka their church. The admiration and the respect they would get from the people to actually blind them to the love and the purpose of God. It's so much so the Bible talks about our righteousness exceeding that of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The people that killed Jesus were mainly the ones who were in charge. They were jealous. They didn't want anybody else getting what they had. And to them, Jesus was a threat. It's like, well, if he's this person, then we're not going to get what we want anymore. We're not going to get that attention. People are revering him. They're calling him teacher. They're calling him prophet. But they were jealous. And then finally, Judas. Judas allowed his greed to ultimately distract him from Christ, from the power of Christ, from the love of God. Jesus would have, if Judas would have come and asked Jesus for forgiveness, Jesus would have forgiven him because that's how good he is. But because Judas made the choice to be greedy, he ended up being notorious in the Bible for the man that pointed Jesus out, got money for it, and then regretted it later. And he couldn't do, well, he didn't do anything about it. If he really believed what Jesus was saying, if he really believed that Jesus loved him, if he really believed in the message of salvation, I don't think he would have betrayed Jesus. But he didn't believe it. He was just a greedy man. So finally, I'm just going to say, in this life, as we go on from day to day, ask God, because I know I am, because I ask for help. I just know I ask for help. But ask God to help you not to be distracted from the things of him, not to be distracted from loving him, from giving him his glory, for fulfilling your purpose. Because we were all created for a purpose. It's true. We were all fearfully, wonderfully made, uniquely made. There is no one else on this earth who has our purpose. They may look like us. They may walk like us. They may talk like us. They may be our relative. They could be our kids. They could be our sister, our brother, our mother, our father. But their purpose is not our purpose. God created each of us with a purpose, and he does have a plan for each of us. But it's up to us not to be distracted by comparison of yourself to someone else or even to the things of this crazy world and the things that you see, or even the feelings that you have, examine those. Examine those things. Ask yourself, is this a distraction? Ask God to lead you and guide you. Like Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. It's going to take work. It's going to take daily work. And you're not always going to get it right. However, if you truly, truly, truly want to be a follower of Christ and you need help, which we all do, ask God to guide you so that nothing becomes a distraction from what the purpose that He has for us, from pleasing Him, from doing His will, no matter how good it looks, no matter how bad you want to do it, no matter how bad you desire it, no matter what you can see. Because ultimately, because God knows what's best for us, He can see our future, He knows what's going to happen. We have to make that human choice to trust Him. I guarantee you that choice will result in a reward. So again, don't let distractions lead to destruction. That is all I have. Bless the Lord today.